The soft chime of her alarm clock echoed through the spacious bedroom at apartment 1A, Kensington Palace, as the first rays of dawn painted the London sky in gentle pastels. Catherine stirred beneath the crisp white linens, her mind already racing through the day's responsibilities before her feet touched the cool hardwood floor. At 6:30 in the morning, while most of the world still slept, the Princess of Wales was beginning what would be another carefully orchestrated yet deeply personal day. She moved quietly through her morning routine, mindful not to wake William, who had returned late from a charity engagement the night before. The bathroom mirror reflected a woman who, despite her royal title, looked remarkably like any other mother preparing for a busy day. Her hair fell in natural waves around her shoulders, and, without makeup, her face showed the gentle lines that came from years of genuine smiles and the occasional worry that motherhood brought. Catherine's morning skincare routine was simpler than many imagined. She cleansed her face with a gentle cream cleanser, applied a vitamin C serum that had become her morning staple, and finished with a moisturizer with SPF protection. These moments of quiet self-care weren't about vanity but about taking a few precious minutes for herself before the day consumed her attention entirely. The wardrobe selection process was more complex than most people realized. Catherine stood before her organized closet, considering not just the weather and her schedule, but the message each outfit would convey. Today's agenda included a visit to a children's hospital, followed by a meeting with her early childhood development team, and ending with a reception for military families. Each event required different considerations. For the hospital visit, she chose colors that would be cheerful but not overwhelming for sick children. Her outfit needed to be professional yet approachable, expensive enough to show respect for the occasion but not so luxurious as to seem out of touch. She selected a navy blue dress from one of her favorite designers, paired with nude pumps that were comfortable enough for long periods of standing. The dress was modest in cut but beautifully tailored, striking the perfect balance between royal elegance and maternal warmth. She added her sapphire and diamond earrings, the ones William had given her for their 5th wedding anniversary, and her engagement ring caught the morning light as she fastened them. As she dressed, Catherine's mind wandered to the letter she had received the previous week from a mother whose child had been treated at the hospital she would visit today. The woman had written about how much the princess's previous visits had meant to the children and families, how her presence had brought light to some of their darkest days. These letters, which arrived regularly at Kensington Palace, served as constant reminders of why her role mattered beyond the ceremonial aspects. The sounds of the household awakening began to filter through the walls. She could hear the quiet footsteps of their housekeeper beginning her daily routine, and, somewhere down the hall, one of the children was stirring. Catherine smiled, knowing that despite the carefully planned schedule ahead, her children would still find ways to surprise her with their requests, their needs, or simply their desire for one more hug before she left. She made her way to the kitchen, a surprisingly normal space that could have belonged to any well-appointed family home. The royal household staff had offered to prepare her breakfast, but Catherine preferred these quiet morning moments when she could perform the simple, grounding task of making her own tea. She filled the kettle with water and selected her favorite breakfast tea blend, a routine that connected her to millions of other British women starting their day in exactly the same way. While waiting for the water to boil, Catherine reviewed the briefing notes for her first engagement. The Children's Hospital had recently opened a new wing dedicated to mental health services for young patients, something very close to her heart. Her own advocacy for mental health awareness had grown from her deep belief that emotional well-being was just as important as physical health, especially for children who were already facing medical challenges. The briefing included details about several children she would meet, their conditions, and their interests. There was 7-year-old Emma, who had been battling leukemia for 2 years and loved to paint, 12-year-old James, who was recovering from a serious car accident and dreamed of becoming a football player, and 5-year-old Aisha, who had been born with a rare genetic condition but had an infectious smile that, according to the nurses, could brighten anyone's day. Catherine made mental notes about each child, thinking about how she might connect with them individually. She remembered her own children at those ages, their fears and joys, their remarkable resilience and their need for reassurance. These personal experiences as a mother had transformed her approach to royal duties, making every interaction with children more meaningful and authentic. The kettle whistled softly, and she poured the hot water over her tea bag, watching the amber color slowly spread through the clear water. This moment of stillness was precious, one of the few times in her day when she could simply be Catherine rather than the Princess of Wales. She thought about her mother-in-law, Queen Elizabeth, and how she had managed to maintain her sense of self throughout decades of public service. The late Queen had once told her that the key to surviving royal life was to remember that the role was something you did, not something you were. Footsteps on the stairs announced that her family was waking up. William appeared first, already dressed for his own busy day of engagements. Even after all these years of marriage, she still felt a flutter of appreciation when she saw him in his morning suit, looking every inch the future king while still managing to seem like the man who made her laugh until her sides hurt when they were alone. "Good morning," he said, kissing her cheek as he reached for his own cup. Their morning routine was a carefully choreographed dance of shared space and mutual consideration, developed over years of practice. "How are you feeling about today?" Catherine smiled, knowing he understood the weight of her schedule. "Ready," she said simply, but he could read in her eyes the mixture of anticipation and responsibility she carried. "The hospital visit will be wonderful. The new mental health wing is exactly what these children need." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of their children, who burst into the kitchen with the chaotic energy that only children could bring to a quiet morning. Prince George, now growing tall and looking more like his father every day, was already dressed in his school uniform but had somehow managed to get toothpaste on his tie. Princess Charlotte bounced in wearing her favorite dress, insisting it was perfect for Tuesday even though Tuesday had no particular significance. Prince Louis, still small enough to climb onto chairs to reach the counter, announced that he had lost his favorite toy car and was convinced it had been stolen by pirates. These moments of beautiful, ordinary chaos grounded Catherine in reality. Despite the titles and the palaces, despite the careful protocols and the constant public attention, her children were simply children with the same needs, fears, and joys as any others. They needed breakfast and help finding lost toys and reassurance that their day would go well. They needed their mother to listen when they talked about their dreams and their worries, and they needed to feel safe in her love regardless of what the world expected from their family. She helped George clean his tie while listening to Charlotte's detailed explanation of why Tuesday deserved a special dress. She promised Louis that they would conduct a thorough search for the missing car after school and suggested that perhaps it had simply gone on an adventure and would return home soon. These small acts of mothering felt as important as any royal duty, perhaps more so. The family shared breakfast together, a meal that could have been found in any household across Britain. There were scrambled eggs and toast, fresh fruit, and the gentle chaos of children eating while talking about everything and nothing. Catherine listened to George discuss his upcoming history test about medieval castles, secretly amused by the irony of a future king studying the history of the buildings his family actually lived in. Charlotte shared her plans to paint a picture for her art class, describing in vivid detail the rainbow she intended to create. Catherine encouraged her daughter's creativity while mentally noting the parallel to young Emma at the hospital, who also loved to paint. These connections between her personal life and her public duties were constant, each informing and enriching the other. As breakfast wound down, the reality of the day's schedule began to reassert itself. Catherine's private secretary appeared with final updates and confirmations, speaking quietly to avoid disrupting the family meal but ensuring the princess was fully prepared for what lay ahead. There were security protocols to review, timing adjustments based on traffic conditions, and a last-minute addition to her schedule at the hospital where the staff had requested she visit a child who had just received particularly challenging news about his treatment. Catherine listened to these updates while helping Louis wipe jam from his fingers, multitasking in the way that had become second nature to her. She asked thoughtful questions about the additional visit, wanting to understand how she could best support both the child and his family during what was clearly a difficult time. The children began to gather their school bags and lunch boxes, the morning's peaceful rhythm shifting into the more hurried pace of departure time. Catherine hugged each child goodbye, holding them perhaps a moment longer than usual, breathing in their familiar scent and storing the memory of their sleepy smiles to carry with her through the day. George, now old enough to understand something of his mother's role, told her to do good work today, a phrase that never failed to move her. Charlotte whispered that she hoped the children at the hospital would feel better after seeing her, displaying an emotional intelligence that constantly amazed Catherine. Louis simply wrapped his small arms around her neck and told her he loved her, words that filled her heart and reminded her of what truly mattered. As her family departed for their own day, Catherine felt the familiar shift from mother to princess, though she carried pieces of both roles with her always. She gathered her handbag, checked that she had the small gifts she liked to bring to the children at the hospital, and took one last look in the mirror. The woman looking back at her was ready for whatever the day would bring, armed with genuine caring, careful preparation, and the strength that came from knowing her work had real meaning. The car that would take her to her first engagement was waiting outside, her protection officers having already coordinated with the hospital security team to ensure everything would run smoothly. As Catherine walked toward the entrance of Kensington Palace, she passed portraits of royal family members who had walked these halls before her, each having found their own way to balance personal happiness with public duty. She thought about the children she would meet in just a few hours, about their courage in facing challenges that would overwhelm many adults, and about their families who watched over them with the same fierce love she felt for her own children. This connection, this understanding of what it meant to love a child and want the world to be better for them, was what transformed her royal duties from obligation into passion. The morning air was crisp as she stepped outside, and London was beginning to stir with the energy of a new day. Soon she would be surrounded by crowds and cameras, fulfilling her role as a representative of the crown, but, for now, in these last quiet moments, she was simply a woman who had been given extraordinary opportunities to make a difference in the lives of others, and she was determined not to waste a single one of them. The journey to Great Ormond Street Hospital took Catherine through the heart of London, past familiar landmarks that had become the backdrop of her royal life. She sat quietly in the back seat, reviewing her notes one final time while watching the city wake up around her. Office workers hurried along sidewalks with coffee cups in hand, tourists gathered around famous monuments with cameras ready, and schoolchildren walked in small groups, their laughter audible even through the car windows. These glimpses of ordinary life always reminded Catherine of the world beyond royal protocols and palace walls. She wondered about the stories of the people she glimpsed through the window, their hopes and struggles, their daily triumphs and disappointments. This curiosity about others had always been one of her defining characteristics, something that made her genuinely interested in the people she met during her engagements rather than simply performing royal duties by rote. As they approached the hospital, Catherine could see the familiar sight of photographers and reporters gathering behind barriers, their cameras and microphones ready to capture every moment of her visit. She had long ago learned to tune out the constant click of camera shutters and the shouted questions, focusing instead on the real purpose of her presence. Today's visit wasn't about the photographs that would appear in tomorrow's newspapers, but about the children and families inside who would benefit from the attention her presence brought to their challenges. The car pulled up to the hospital's main entrance, where senior staff members waited to greet her. Catherine stepped out with the practiced grace that came from years of public appearances, her smile genuine as she was introduced to the hospital's chief executive, the head of the new mental health wing, and several nurses who would guide her through the visit. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the consultant psychiatrist who had spearheaded the development of the new mental health services, stepped forward with an expression of nervous excitement. She had worked for years to secure funding for expanded mental health support for pediatric patients, and the princess's visit would bring invaluable attention to their work. "Your Royal Highness," Dr. Mitchell said, offering a slight curtsy, "we're absolutely thrilled to have you here today. The children are so excited to meet you, and I know your visit will mean the world to them and their families." Catherine shook her hand warmly, immediately putting the doctor at ease. "Thank you so much for having me, and for all the incredible work you're doing here. I've read about the new mental health wing, and I'm so impressed by your innovative approach to treating the whole child, not just their physical symptoms." As they walked through the hospital corridors, Catherine was struck by the careful attention to creating a welcoming, non-institutional atmosphere. The walls were painted in soft, cheerful colors, and artwork created by young patients lined the hallways. She paused to examine several pieces, asking about the artists and making mental notes to mention them during her conversations with the children. The first stop was the new therapy rooms, designed specifically for children dealing with the emotional challenges that came with serious illness. The space was unlike any traditional hospital room Catherine had ever seen. Soft natural lighting filtered through large windows, comfortable seating areas were arranged to feel more like a family living room than a clinical setting, and interactive elements throughout the space invited children to engage with their environment in positive ways. Dr. Mitchell explained how the design of the space was based on extensive research into what helped children feel safe and comfortable when discussing difficult emotions.
We found that traditional clinical settings often made children feel more anxious, she said.
By creating spaces that feel more like home, we've seen remarkable improvements in how willing children are to open up about their fears and concerns. Catherine listened intently, asking thoughtful questions about the therapeutic approaches being used and the training provided to staff members. Her genuine interest was evident in the detailed nature of her questions and the way she connected the information to her own advocacy work in mental health awareness. This aligns so perfectly with what we're learning about early intervention, Catherine observed. When children develop healthy coping mechanisms during these challenging experiences, it serves them throughout their lives. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Emma, the 7-year-old with leukemia who loved to paint. She appeared around the corner in a wheelchair pushed by her mother, wearing a bright yellow headscarf that couldn't quite hide her lack of hair from chemotherapy treatments. Despite her physical frailty, Emma's eyes sparkled with excitement as she spotted the princess. Catherine immediately crouched down to Emma's eye level, a gesture that came naturally from her own experience as a mother.
"Hello, Emma," she said softly. "I've heard you're an amazing artist. Would you like to show me some of your paintings?" Emma's face lit up as she nodded enthusiastically.
Her mother, clearly moved by the princess's gentle approach, guided them toward a small alcove where several of Emma's recent works were displayed. The paintings showed remarkable skill for a child her age, but, more importantly, they revealed a spirit that refused to be dimmed by her illness. "This one is my favorite," Emma said, pointing to a vibrant painting of a garden filled with flowers of every imaginable color. "I painted it when I was feeling really sad about losing my hair. But, then, I remembered that flowers grow back every spring, so maybe my hair will too." Catherine felt her throat tighten with emotion at the child's wisdom and resilience. "That's absolutely beautiful, Emma, and you're absolutely right about flowers growing back. Your painting makes me feel so happy, and I think it would make anyone who sees it feel happy too." They spent several minutes discussing Emma's artwork, with Catherine asking about her favorite colors and techniques while Emma beamed with pride at having such an interested audience. The princess's attention was completely focused on the child, ignoring the cameras and reporters who had been permitted to capture portions of the visit. Emma's mother, who had been quietly watching the interaction, stepped forward when there was a natural pause in the conversation. "Your Royal Highness," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "I can't tell you what this means to us. Emma has been talking about your visit for weeks, and seeing her smile like this." She paused, unable to continue for a moment. "It's the brightest I've seen her in months." Catherine stood and took the woman's hand, understanding the weight of fear and hope that every parent in this hospital carried. "Emma is an extraordinary little girl," she said. "Her strength and her art are truly inspiring. And you're doing an amazing job supporting her through all of this." The next stop was the adolescent ward, where 12-year-old James was waiting. His story was different from Emma's but equally challenging. The car accident that had injured his spine had not only threatened his dream of becoming a professional footballer but had also left him struggling with depression and anxiety about his future. James was initially less enthusiastic about the royal visit, slouched in his hospital bed with his arms crossed and a skeptical expression. Catherine recognized the defensive posture immediately, remembering similar behavior from teenagers she had worked with in various charitable contexts. This was a young person trying to protect himself from further disappointment by not allowing himself to hope or get excited about anything. Rather than launching into cheerful small talk, Catherine pulled up a chair beside his bed and sat quietly for a moment. "I heard you love football," she said eventually. "So do my boys. George is completely obsessed with it right now." James glanced at her with slight interest. "Yeah? What team does he support?" "Aston Villa, actually," Catherine replied with a smile. "William got him into it, and now George knows more statistics about their players than I ever thought a 9-year-old could remember." This admission broke through James's defensive barriers slightly. "That's cool. I support Chelsea. Or I did, anyway." His voice trailed off, and Catherine could hear the pain behind his words. "Tell me about that," she said gently. "What position did you play?" For the next 15 minutes, James opened up about his love for the game, his dreams of playing professionally, and his current struggle with accepting that his future might look different than he had planned. Catherine listened without offering false platitudes or unrealistic encouragement, instead validating his feelings while gently introducing the idea that there were many ways to be involved in football even if playing professionally wasn't possible. "You know," she said, "some of the most important people in football are the ones who help other players succeed. Coaches, sports psychologists, physiotherapists. They all need to understand the game as well as the players do." James considered this, his expression thoughtful.
I never really thought about that.
"I guess I just assumed if I couldn't play, football was over for me."
Not at all, Catherine assured him.
"In fact, having experienced what you're going through might make you better at helping other young athletes who face similar challenges. Sometimes our biggest difficulties can become our greatest strengths." Dr. Mitchell, who had been observing the conversation, was struck by how naturally Catherine had shifted the focus from what James had lost to what he might gain. This was exactly the kind of reframing that the hospital's mental health team worked to achieve with their patients, but it had taken weeks of therapy sessions to get James to this point of openness. The final individual visit was with 5-year-old Aisha, whose genetic condition required ongoing medical care but whose personality was as bright as her smile suggested. She was waiting in the playroom with her grandmother, surrounded by toys and clearly excited about meeting a real princess.
"Are you really a princess?"
Aisha asked the moment Catherine entered the room, her eyes wide with wonder. "I am," Catherine replied, sitting cross-legged on the floor beside the little girl.
"But I'm also a mummy, just like your mummy. I have 3 children at home."
Aisha processed this information seriously.
"Do they live in a castle?"
"We live in a palace, which is a bit like a castle, but not as exciting as you might think," Catherine said with a laugh. "It's just a very big house with lots of rooms and some fancy furniture." This honest, age-appropriate explanation delighted Aisha, who immediately launched into a detailed description of her own house and her pet cat, Whiskers, who apparently had very strong opinions about vegetables.
Catherine listened with genuine attention, asking follow-up questions and laughing at appropriate moments.
Aisha's grandmother watched this interaction with tears in her eyes. Her granddaughter had been through so much medical trauma in her short life, and seeing her chat so naturally with the princess felt like a moment of pure childhood joy that had been too rare lately. The group portion of the visit brought Catherine to the hospital's main children's ward, where a dozen young patients and their families had gathered. The atmosphere was one of excited anticipation mixed with the underlying tension that permeated any space where seriously ill children received treatment. Catherine moved through the group with practiced ease, spending time with each family while being careful not to show favoritism or make anyone feel overlooked. She admired artwork, listened to stories about favorite school subjects, and answered questions about her own children with the kind of maternal warmth that made even the shyest children comfortable talking with her. One particularly poignant moment came when 8-year-old Michael, who had been receiving treatment for a brain tumor, presented her with a drawing he had made specifically for her visit. The picture showed a stick figure woman wearing a crown standing next to a hospital, with the words "Thank you Princess Catherine" written in careful block letters across the top. "This is absolutely wonderful, Michael," Catherine said, accepting the drawing with obvious emotion. "I'm going to keep this in my office so I can look at it every day and remember what a talented artist you are." Michael beamed with pride, and his parents exchanged glances that spoke of their gratitude for this moment of happiness in what had been a very difficult period for their family. As the formal visit concluded, Catherine took time to speak privately with several of the parents, understanding that they too needed support and recognition for their strength in caring for sick children. These conversations happened away from cameras, without fanfare, but were often the most meaningful parts of her hospital visits. One mother broke down while describing the challenges of maintaining hope when her daughter's treatment wasn't progressing as expected. Catherine listened without trying to fix anything, simply offering her presence and understanding as someone who, while blessed with healthy children, could imagine the depth of such fear and love. "You're doing everything right," Catherine assured her. "Sometimes the most important thing we can do for our children is simply love them through the difficult times, and that's exactly what you're doing." Before leaving the hospital, Catherine met with the senior medical staff to discuss how her patronage of various mental health organizations might support their work going forward. These behind-the-scenes conversations were often where the real impact of royal visits was planned and developed. Dr. Mitchell outlined several research projects that could benefit from royal attention and funding, including studies on how family-centered mental health support improved outcomes for pediatric patients. Catherine listened carefully, asking detailed questions about timelines, funding needs, and how success would be measured. "I'd like to stay involved with this work," Catherine said. "Perhaps we could arrange for some of my mental health initiative team to meet with your researchers to explore collaboration opportunities." As her car pulled away from Great Ormond Street Hospital, Catherine sat quietly, processing the emotional intensity of the morning's visits. Each child's story had touched her deeply, reminding her of both the fragility and the remarkable resilience of young people facing enormous challenges. She thought about Emma's painting of the garden, James's gradual acceptance that his dreams might evolve rather than end, and Aisha's infectious joy despite her medical struggles. These children had taught her as much as she hoped she had encouraged them, and she carried their stories with her as inspiration for her continued advocacy work. The drive to her next engagement gave Catherine time to decompress and transition from the emotional intensity of the hospital visit to the more formal atmosphere of her afternoon meeting. But she knew that the faces and voices of the children she had met would stay with her, informing her work and reminding her of why her platform as Princess of Wales could make a real difference in the lives of others. The Royal Foundation offices in central London provided a stark contrast to the hospital's warm, child-centered environment. Here, in a sleek conference room overlooking the Thames, Catherine would spend the next 2 hours immersed in the strategic planning that formed the backbone of her public work. The transition from comforting sick children to analyzing research data and program metrics represented the dual nature of modern royal duties, requiring both emotional intelligence and analytical thinking. Catherine arrived to find her core team already assembled around the polished conference table. Her private secretary, Rebecca, had laid out briefing documents with characteristic precision, while Dr. Amanda Foster, the leading child development expert who advised the princess on her early years initiative, was reviewing presentation slides on her laptop. The atmosphere was professional but relaxed, reflecting the collaborative relationship Catherine had cultivated with her staff over the years. "How did the hospital visit go?" Rebecca asked as Catherine settled into her chair, knowing that these emotional engagements often required a few moments to process before diving into business matters. "Incredibly moving," Catherine replied, accepting a cup of tea from the assistant who anticipated her needs without being asked. "The new mental health wing is exactly what we hoped it would be. The children were remarkable, as always." She paused, thinking about Emma's painting and James's cautious hope. It really reinforced why this work matters so much. Dr. Foster leaned forward with interest. "Actually, that connects perfectly with what we want to discuss today. We've received the preliminary results from the longitudinal study on early childhood interventions, and the data supports everything we've been advocating for." The presentation that followed would have impressed any university boardroom. Charts and graphs illustrated the measurable impact of early childhood programs on everything from academic achievement to mental health outcomes in adolescence. Catherine studied each slide carefully, asking detailed questions that revealed her deep understanding of the subject matter. "The correlation between early emotional support and later resilience is even stronger than we anticipated," Dr. Foster explained, pointing to a particularly compelling graph. Children who received comprehensive early years support were 60% less likely to experience severe mental health crises in their teenage years. Catherine absorbed this information with the seriousness it deserved. "This is exactly the evidence we need to convince policymakers to invest more heavily in prevention rather than intervention," she said. "Can we break this down by geographic region and socioeconomic factors?" The next slide did exactly that, revealing disparities that Catherine found both predictable and frustrating. Children from disadvantaged backgrounds showed the most dramatic improvements when they received quality early years support, but were also the least likely to have access to such programs. "This is where we can make the biggest difference," Catherine observed, studying the data carefully. "If we can demonstrate that investing in early years programs in disadvantaged communities produces both better outcomes for children and long-term cost savings for society, we have a compelling case for policy change." Rebecca pulled out her tablet to make notes as Catherine outlined her vision for the next phase of their advocacy work. "I want us to identify 3 communities where we can pilot comprehensive early years programs," Catherine said. We need to document everything meticulously so we can present concrete evidence of impact to government ministers. The conversation shifted to operational details that revealed the careful planning behind Catherine's public appearances. Each engagement was designed not just to raise awareness but to gather evidence, build relationships, and advance specific policy goals. The princess's natural warmth and genuine interest in people were powerful tools for advocacy, but they were supported by rigorous research and strategic thinking. Dr. Foster presented the team's recommendation for partnering with several universities to expand their research capabilities. We have expressions of interest from Cambridge, Oxford, and University College London, she explained. Each brings different strengths to the collaboration, and together they could help us build the most comprehensive data set on early childhood development ever assembled in the UK. Catherine considered the proposal carefully. What about including institutions outside of London and the South East? She asked. We need to ensure our research reflects the experiences of families throughout the country, not just those in affluent areas. This attention to geographic and socio-economic diversity was typical of Catherine's approach to her charitable work. She had learned early in her royal role that well-intentioned programs often failed because they were designed by privileged people for privileged communities, missing the real challenges faced by those who needed help most. The team spent the next hour developing a framework for evaluating potential university partnerships, considering factors ranging from research capabilities to community connections. Catherine's questions revealed her understanding that successful programs required more than academic excellence, they needed deep roots in the communities they aimed to serve. I want to visit each potential partner institution, Catherine decided. Not for photo opportunities, but for real working meetings where I can understand their approach and see how they connect with local families. Rebecca made notes about scheduling these visits, already mentally calculating the logistics of arranging meaningful engagements rather than superficial appearances. This was one of the most challenging aspects of royal scheduling, creating opportunities for substantive work within the constraints of security requirements and media attention. The conversation was interrupted by a call from Kensington Palace. Catherine's assistant explained that Prince Louis had fallen at school and needed to be collected early. Nothing serious, just a scraped knee and the kind of emotional distress that required maternal comfort more than medical attention. Catherine's immediate shift from policy advocate to concerned mother illustrated the constant juggling act of her life. I need to go, she said, already gathering her papers. Can we continue this discussion tomorrow morning? The team quickly reorganized their afternoon plans, with Dr. Foster agreeing to compile additional research on university partnerships and Rebecca rescheduling a call with potential funders. Catherine's staff had long ago learned to build flexibility into her schedule, understanding that family responsibilities would always take precedence when children needed their mother. The drive back to Kensington Palace gave Catherine time to transition from professional mode back to maternal concerns. She called the school to get more details about Louis's accident and spoke with the nurse who had cleaned and bandaged his knee. These conversations revealed the careful balance she maintained between being an accessible mother and respecting the privacy and normalcy her children needed. By the time she arrived at the school, Louis had recovered enough to feel slightly embarrassed by the fuss, but he still ran to his mother with the desperate relief that only small children could express. Catherine hugged him carefully, checking his bandaged knee while listening to his somewhat dramatic account of the playground incident. And then, I was running really fast because Tom said I couldn't catch him, and then, there was this big rock that I didn't see, and then, I fell down really hard and it hurt so much, Louis explained, his words tumbling over each other in his eagerness to share the story. That sounds very scary, Catherine said seriously, giving his concern the respect it deserved. But, look how brave you were letting the nurse clean your knee and put on this excellent bandage. Louis examined the colorful bandage with renewed pride. Can I show George and Charlotte when they get home? Absolutely, Catherine assured him. They'll be very impressed by how brave you were. The car ride home was filled with Louis's continued narration of his adventure, his mood completely restored now that he had his mother's undivided attention. Catherine listened with the patience that came from understanding that these moments of connection were as important as any royal engagement. Back at Kensington Palace, Catherine helped Louis change out of his school clothes while he continued to process the day's excitement. These quiet domestic moments provided a necessary counterbalance to the intensity of her public schedule, grounding her in the simple but profound responsibilities of motherhood.
"Mummy," Louis said as she helped him into comfortable clothes, "will you tell Daddy about my knee when he comes home?"
"Of course I will," Catherine promised.
"He'll want to hear all about your brave day."
With Louis settled comfortably with a snack and his favorite book, Catherine had a brief window to review the materials from her afternoon meeting before her children returned from school. She spread Dr. Foster's research papers across her desk, making notes about questions she wanted to explore further. The data on early childhood development continued to fascinate her, not just as professional information but as a mother who wanted to understand how to best support her own children's growth. The research confirmed many of her instincts about the importance of emotional security and consistent support, while also revealing nuances she hadn't previously considered. One study particularly caught her attention, examining how children who experienced trauma could develop remarkable resilience when they had at least one stable, supportive relationship in their lives. Catherine thought about the children she had met at the hospital that morning, each dealing with the trauma of serious illness but supported by loving families and dedicated medical staff. George and Charlotte arrived home full of their own stories about the day, eager to hear about Louis's adventure and sympathetic about his injury. Catherine marveled at their natural empathy, the way they immediately focused on comforting their younger brother rather than competing for attention.
"Does it still hurt?"
Charlotte asked, examining Louis's bandage with serious concern. "Only a little bit," Louis replied, clearly enjoying the attention.
"And, look, it has dinosaurs on it."
George, ever the protective older brother, declared that he would help Louis be extra careful during their evening playtime. "We'll play something safe," he announced.
"Maybe chess or building with blocks."
Catherine watched these interactions with the mixture of pride and gratitude that had become familiar since becoming a mother. Her children's kindness toward each other was something she and William had worked to cultivate, but seeing it expressed so naturally still filled her heart. The afternoon homework supervision revealed another aspect of Catherine's daily routine that rarely made headlines but consumed significant time and energy. George needed help with mathematics problems that were becoming increasingly challenging, while Charlotte required patient encouragement to complete a writing assignment about her favorite family tradition. "I want to write about our Sunday morning pancakes," Charlotte announced, "but I don't know how to spell delicious." Catherine helped her sound out the word while simultaneously checking George's multiplication tables and keeping an eye on Louis, who was allegedly playing quietly but actually attempting to teach his stuffed animals to perform acrobatic feats. These moments of domestic multitasking were perhaps the most realistic aspect of Catherine's daily life, proving that even princesses faced the universal challenges of helping children with homework while managing household chaos. The children's tea time was a carefully orchestrated event that balanced nutrition with the diplomatic challenge of convincing three young people to eat vegetables they had rejected the previous day. Catherine had learned to present the same foods in different ways, to involve the children in meal planning, and to model the eating behaviors she wanted to encourage.
"If I eat all my carrots, can I have extra time before bed?"
George negotiated, displaying the bargaining skills that would serve him well in future diplomatic endeavors. "Let's start with eating the carrots because they're good for your body," Catherine replied diplomatically, "and then we'll see about bedtime." Charlotte, observing this exchange, strategically ate her own vegetables without comment, earning an approving smile from her mother. Louis, meanwhile, had decided that his peas needed to be counted before consumption, leading to a detailed mathematical exercise that actually encouraged him to eat them. As tea time concluded and the children transitioned to their evening activities, Catherine felt the familiar satisfaction of small parental victories. George had completed his homework without excessive drama, Charlotte had eaten her vegetables and finished her writing assignment, and Louis had survived his playground adventure with minimal long-term trauma. The early evening hours before William's return home were typically Catherine's time for final preparations for the next day's engagements and for the kind of administrative work that kept her charitable initiatives running smoothly. Today, however, she found herself drawn back to the research materials from her afternoon meeting. The data on early childhood development was compelling, but Catherine understood that numbers alone wouldn't convince policymakers to invest in prevention programs. She needed personal stories that illustrated the human impact of these interventions, real families whose lives had been changed by early support.
This realization led to an idea that excited her. What if they could create a documentary series that followed families through early childhood programs, showing both the challenges they faced and the progress they made? The combination of compelling personal narratives and solid research data could be a powerful advocacy tool. Catherine made notes about this concept, planning to discuss it with her team the following day. She envisioned something that would humanize policy discussions while respecting the privacy and dignity of the families involved. Done well, it could shift public conversation about early years investment from abstract social policy to concrete stories about real children and families. The sound of William's car in the drive announced his return home, and Catherine felt the familiar pleasure of having her family complete again. Despite their busy schedules and public responsibilities, these evening reunions remained precious touchstones that grounded them in what mattered most. The transition from individual family member to complete family unit was always slightly magical, as the children's energy shifted from the contained excitement of waiting for daddy to the explosive joy of sharing their day with him. Catherine watched William listen to 3 overlapping accounts of the day's events, his attention somehow managing to encompass all of them while making each child feel heard. These moments reminded Catherine why she had fallen in love with William in the first place, his ability to be completely present with the people he loved, regardless of what other pressures and responsibilities demanded his attention. As the family settled into their evening routine, Catherine reflected on the day's emotional journey from the hospital to her strategy meeting to her children's homework table. Each environment had required different skills and focus, but all had contributed to her understanding of her role and purpose. The children she had met at the hospital that morning remained in her thoughts, their courage and resilience inspiring her continued commitment to improving support for vulnerable families. The research data from her afternoon meeting provided the evidence base for policy advocacy, while her own children's needs kept her grounded in the practical realities of child development and family life. This integration of personal experience, professional knowledge, and royal platform created opportunities for impact that Catherine never took for granted. Each day brought new chances to learn, to advocate, and to make a difference in the lives of children and families across the country. The evening reception for military families at Wellington Barracks represented the culmination of Catherine's public duties for the day, but it was far from a mere ceremonial obligation. As she prepared for the event, Catherine understood that the families she would meet had made sacrifices that most people could barely imagine, and her presence was an opportunity to acknowledge their service while advocating for better support systems. The car journey to Wellington Barracks gave Catherine time to review the details about the families who would attend. Her briefing notes told stories of remarkable resilience, spouses who had managed households and raised children through multiple deployments, children who had moved schools repeatedly to follow military postings, and service members who had returned from difficult assignments to rebuild their family relationships. One family's story particularly moved her. Sarah Thompson, whose husband had completed 3 tours in Afghanistan, had struggled with the challenges of single parenting during deployments while also managing her own career as a nurse. Their 2 children, ages 8 and 10, had changed schools 6 times in 5 years, always adapting with the resilience that military families developed out of necessity. Another briefing highlighted the Martinez family, whose teenage daughter had become a passionate advocate for military children's educational needs after experiencing the challenges of constantly changing schools. Despite the disruptions to her own education, she had maintained excellent grades and was planning to study international relations at university. These stories reminded Catherine that military families represented a unique subset of the population, one that often faced challenges invisibly while serving their country. Her role tonight was to ensure they felt seen, appreciated, and supported by the institution they served. Wellington Barracks had been transformed for the reception, with the historic setting providing a dignified backdrop for the evening's events. As Catherine arrived, she was greeted by senior military officials who would guide her through the evening's program. The atmosphere was one of respectful celebration, honoring both the service members and their families. The receiving line allowed Catherine to meet each family individually, creating moments of personal connection that would be remembered long after the formal event ended. She approached each interaction with genuine curiosity about their experiences and sincere appreciation for their service. The Thompson family was among the first she met. Sarah Thompson's nervous smile revealed both her excitement about meeting the princess and her underlying exhaustion from years of managing extraordinary challenges. Her children, 8-year-old Marcus and 10-year-old Emma,
stood politely beside their parents, clearly overwhelmed by the grandeur of the setting. "Mrs. Thompson," Catherine said warmly, "I've heard about your incredible work as a nurse while also supporting your family through deployments. That must require remarkable strength and organization." Sarah's eyes filled with tears at this recognition. "Thank you, Your Royal Highness. Some days I wonder how we manage it all, but you just find a way, don't you? The children are amazing, really. They're much braver than I am." Catherine crouched down to speak with Marcus and Emma directly. "Your mummy tells me you've been to lots of different schools. That must be quite an adventure, but also sometimes difficult." Emma, the older child, nodded seriously. "It's hard making new friends every time we move, but we've learned that military kids understand each other really well. We know what it's like to miss Daddy and to start over in new places." The maturity in Emma's voice struck Catherine deeply. This 10-year-old had already learned lessons about adaptability and resilience that many adults never mastered. "That's very wise," Catherine replied. "I think you and Marcus are teaching other children important lessons about courage and friendship." Marcus, emboldened by his sister's example, added, "We keep a map in our room with pins showing all the places we've lived. Mummy says it shows how many adventures we've had." Catherine smiled at this positive reframing of what could have been seen as instability. "What a wonderful way to think about it. You're collecting experiences that most children never have the chance to enjoy." The conversation with the Thompson family set the tone for the entire reception. Catherine approached each interaction with genuine interest in the family's story, specific questions about their experiences, and acknowledgement of both their challenges and their strengths. The Martinez family presented a different but equally compelling narrative. Teenage daughter Sophia had transformed her own educational challenges into advocacy work, creating a support network for other military children facing similar transitions. Her confidence and articulate explanation of her initiatives impressed Catherine immediately. "I started the Military Kids Connect program after my 5th school change," Sophia explained. "I realized that there were resources and strategies that could help military children succeed academically despite frequent moves, but no one was sharing this information systematically." Catherine was fascinated by Sophia's initiative and asked detailed questions about how the program worked. "What have you found to be the most effective strategies?" she asked. "Communication is crucial," Sophia replied with the confidence of someone who had thoroughly researched her subject. "When families can communicate effectively with new schools about a child's educational history and specific needs, the transition goes much more smoothly. We've also developed peer mentoring programs where military kids who have successfully navigated multiple moves help newcomers." The princess was impressed not only by Sophia's problem-solving skills but by her understanding of systemic issues. "Have you been able to share these strategies with education officials?" Catherine asked. "We're working on that," Sophia said. "My goal is to create standardized protocols that all schools can use when enrolling military children. The research shows that with the right support, frequent moves can actually enhance children's adaptability and global perspective rather than hindering their education." This conversation sparked Catherine's interest in exploring whether her platform could help amplify successful grassroots initiatives like Sophia's program. She made mental notes to have her team follow up with opportunities to support and publicize effective advocacy work being done by military families themselves. As the reception progressed, Catherine moved through groups of families, each interaction deepening her understanding of the unique challenges and remarkable resilience that characterized military life. She spoke with spouses who had managed emergencies alone while their partners were deployed overseas, children who had learned to make friends quickly and maintain long-distance relationships, and service members who described the emotional complexity of returning from deployments to families who had necessarily learned to function independently. One particularly moving conversation was with James Walker, a sergeant who had recently returned from a difficult deployment in Eastern Europe. He spoke openly about the challenge of reconnecting with his family after months of separation and high-stress military operations. "The hardest part isn't the physical danger," he explained to Catherine. "It's coming home and feeling like you're interrupting a family system that learned to work without you. My wife and kids develop their own routines and inside jokes, and sometimes I feel like I'm trying to find my place again." Catherine appreciated his honesty about these emotional challenges.
That sounds incredibly difficult, she said. What kind of support has been most helpful as you navigate that transition? The family readjustment programs have been excellent, James replied.
But, honestly, just having conversations like this, where someone acknowledges that these challenges are normal and understandable, that makes a huge difference. Sometimes military families feel like we're supposed to be strong enough to handle everything without support. This insight resonated with Catherine's broader understanding of how stigma prevented many people from seeking help with legitimate challenges. It seems like strength actually comes from recognizing when you need support and being willing to accept it, she observed. The formal program for the evening included brief remarks from senior military officials and Catherine herself. When she took the podium, she spoke from the heart about what she had learned from the families present, weaving their specific stories into her broader message about service and sacrifice.
Tonight I've had the privilege of meeting families who embody the very best of British values, Catherine began. Your service extends far beyond the individual wearing the uniform.
Military families serve our country together, making sacrifices that most of us cannot fully comprehend. She spoke specifically about the children she had met, acknowledging their unique challenges and celebrating their remarkable adaptability. The young people I've spoken with tonight are developing skills that will serve them throughout their lives: resilience, empathy, cultural awareness, and the ability to build connections across differences. These are gifts that come from the experiences they've had as military children. Catherine also addressed the systemic issues that had emerged from her conversations. We must ensure that our institutions recognize and support the unique needs of military families. From educational systems that understand the challenges of frequent moves to mental health resources that address the specific stresses of military life, we have work to do to match the level of support these families provide to our country. The applause that followed her remarks was warm and sustained, but Catherine was more interested in the individual conversations that resumed as the formal program concluded. These informal interactions often provided the most valuable insights and the most meaningful connections. She spent considerable time with a group of military spouses who had started a support network for families dealing with deployment-related mental health challenges. Their grassroots organization provided peer counseling, childcare during therapy appointments, and advocacy for better mental health resources on military bases. We realized that traditional support systems often didn't understand the specific stresses of military life, explained Janet Morrison, one of the group's founders. Civilian counselors, however, well-intentioned, sometimes couldn't grasp why a spouse might be simultaneously proud of their partner's service and resentful of the sacrifices required. This conversation sparked Catherine's interest in exploring how her mental health advocacy work could better address the unique needs of military communities. She recognized that her platform could help bridge the gap between military families and civilian support systems, ensuring that resources were designed with military-specific challenges in mind. As the evening wound down, Catherine made sure to speak with family members who hadn't had opportunities during the formal receiving line. She was particularly drawn to the younger children, understanding that they might feel overlooked in events focused on their parents' service. 8-year-old David Chen had been quietly observing the evening's activities with serious attention. When Catherine approached him, he looked up with solemn eyes that seemed older than his years.
What do you think about all these fancy uniforms and ceremonies? Catherine asked gently. David considered the question carefully before responding. It's nice that people want to say thank you to our families, he said.
But, mostly I just want Daddy to be safe when he goes away for work.
The simplicity and honesty of his response moved Catherine deeply.
That's exactly what everyone here wants, she assured him. All of these people in uniforms work together to keep each other safe, including your daddy.
David nodded thoughtfully. And we keep each other safe at home too. Mummy and I take care of things when Daddy's away, and Daddy takes care of us when he's home.
This child's understanding of family teamwork and mutual care exemplified the values that Catherine had observed throughout the evening. Military families didn't just endure challenges, they developed systems of support and resilience that strengthened their bonds and contributed to their communities. The car journey back to Kensington Palace gave Catherine time to process the emotional richness of the evening's encounters. Each family's story had added depth to her understanding of service and sacrifice, while also revealing opportunities for better support and advocacy. She thought about Sofia Martinez's advocacy work and how it could be scaled to help more military children. She considered James Walker's insights about family readjustment and how mental health resources could be better tailored to military-specific challenges. She reflected on David Chen's simple but profound understanding of family responsibility and how it illustrated the values that military service both required and cultivated. Back at Kensington Palace, Catherine found her own family settled into their evening routines. William was reading bedtime stories to the children, his voice carrying the gentle cadences that had become one of Catherine's favorite sounds. The contrast between the formal military setting she had just left and this intimate family scene highlighted the universal nature of family love and care. George looked up as she entered the nursery. "How was your party, Mummy?" "It wasn't exactly a party," Catherine explained, sitting on the edge of his bed. "It was a special dinner to say thank you to families whose mummies or daddies work as soldiers and have to travel far away for their jobs sometimes." Charlotte, ever empathetic, asked, "Were there children there whose daddies had to go away?" "That would be very sad." "There were," Catherine confirmed, "and it can be sad when families have to be separated. But these children were also very brave and strong, and they understood that their mummies and daddies were doing important work to keep people safe." Louis, who had been listening carefully, announced, "I would miss Daddy if he had to go far away for work." William, who had been quietly following this conversation, pulled Louis close. "And I would miss you too, very much. We're very lucky that my work usually lets me come home every night." This exchange reminded Catherine of how privileged her own family was to face relatively few separations compared to the military families she had met that evening. While royal duties required travel and public engagements, William's role rarely demanded the extended deployments that military families navigated regularly. As the children settled into sleep, Catherine and William had a few quiet moments to debrief the day's experiences. She shared highlights from the hospital visit and the emotional intensity of meeting children facing serious medical challenges. She described the strategic planning session for her early years initiative and her excitement about potential research partnerships. The military family's reception was particularly moving, she told William. "These families have developed such remarkable resilience, but they shouldn't have to navigate everything alone. There are so many opportunities to provide better support." William nodded, understanding both the emotional impact of these encounters and the strategic opportunities they represented. "What kind of support do you think would make the biggest difference?" Catherine had been thinking about this throughout her drive home. "Education seems to be a crucial area. Military children face unique challenges with frequent moves, and, while many adapt beautifully, they could benefit from more systematic support. Mental health resources that understand military-specific stresses are also essential." They discussed how Catherine's existing charitable work could be expanded to better serve military families, and how her platform could amplify successful grassroots initiatives like Sofia Martinez's advocacy program. As they prepared for bed, Catherine reflected on the extraordinary day she had experienced. From the children fighting serious illnesses at the hospital to the strategic planning for early childhood development programs to the remarkable resilience of military families, each engagement had contributed to her understanding of how she could use her role most effectively. The diverse nature of her daily experiences was both a privilege and a responsibility that Catherine never took lightly. Each interaction taught her something new about the challenges facing families across Britain, while also revealing opportunities to advocate for better support and understanding. Standing at her bedroom window, looking out over the quiet gardens of Kensington Palace, Catherine thought about all the families across the country who were ending their days with the same mixture of love, worry, hope, and determination that she felt. Parents were checking on sleeping children, spouses were sharing the events of their days, and families were preparing for whatever tomorrow would bring. The children at the hospital were probably falling asleep with varying degrees of pain and fear, but also with the love of their families surrounding them. Military families scattered across bases around the world were managing bedtime routines that might include video calls to deployed parents or extra comfort for children missing an absent parent. In her own home, Catherine's children slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that both parents were nearby and that tomorrow would bring familiar routines and reliable care. This security was something she would never take for granted, especially after spending time with families facing much greater challenges. The quiet moments before sleep allowed Catherine to process the emotional intensity of her public engagements while also appreciating the simple blessing of her family's safety and togetherness. Each day brought new reminders of both the struggles that many families faced and the remarkable capacity for resilience, love, and hope that characterized the human experience. As she finally settled into bed, Catherine felt the deep satisfaction that came from meaningful work and the gratitude that arose from recognizing her extraordinary opportunities to make a difference. Tomorrow would bring new engagements, new families to meet, and new opportunities to advocate for positive change. But tonight, surrounded by the quiet sounds of her sleeping household, she could rest in the knowledge that she was using her platform purposefully and with genuine care for the people she served. The day that had begun with quiet moments of personal preparation had concluded with a deeper understanding of service, sacrifice, and the many forms that family love could take. Between these bookends lay the rich complexity of royal life, the strategic thinking required for effective advocacy, the emotional intelligence needed for meaningful public engagement, and the constant balance between personal authenticity and public responsibility. Catherine drifted toward sleep thinking about Emma's garden painting, Sophia's advocacy program, and David's simple wisdom about family teamwork. These connections between her public work and universal human experiences were what made her role both challenging and deeply rewarding. Each day offered new opportunities to learn, to serve, and to use her privileged position to amplify the voices and needs of families across Britain who deserved recognition, support, and hope.